welcome everyone to the dotCMS Spring Update for 2021. This is the first of what is really becoming our biannual presentation to talk about the direction for dotCMS as a company and also to highlight what we're focused on in dotCMS engineering and in software development. We've entitled this presentation Building on Momentum, as though 2020 was a tough year, we at dotCMS are really coming out of a banner year with regard to company growth and product innovation improvements. I'm going to be happy to share with you. My name is Will Ezell, and I'm the CTO and co-founder of dotCMS. I oversee our development and cloud engineering teams and have been with dotCMS since its founding. Even before we were a company, I've been here so long that I'm struggling to find a headshot that's not out of date. I'm like a bad date on Match.com. But anyway, before we dive in, I want to talk a little bit about the pillars that shape dotCMS's development. And these pillars really represent broad strokes and really act as a filter with which we look at and prioritize new developments and or features that are coming into the development stream and really help us map these ideas and prioritize these ideas into the development process itself. Our first pillar is entitled Cloud and Sustainability. Now, dotCMS's cloud offering is a growing product. We'll talk about it in the presentation and in different places. And we continue to look to add features and integrations to this cloud product that will make it more scalable, more attractive, and as usable and as useful for our customers as possible. That said, we also have many on-prem customers. And right now, I think we're split roughly 50-50 between our on-prem and our cloud customers. We know that for our on-prem customers, dotCMS maintenance is not a lightweight task, and that anything we can help these on-prem customers with the maintenance and sustainability of their dotCMS installations is going to help us with our cloud installation. And that's why sustainability is so important to us, and that's why it's also tied, in my mind, hand in hand with cloud. The second pillar that drives our development is the idea of hybrid CMS. And hybrid CMS is, in our minds, the future. Headless content management systems have been popping up all over the place. They present a lot of new cool development processes and integrate with new development frameworks. But the thing is headless APIs aren't the only answer. And really, if you look back 20 years ago, when the first CMSs were being developed, the problem set they were designed to solve was the idea that business users aren't able to make meaningful content layout or add page changes to their websites without having to open a support ticket or interact with engineering team. And the headless CMS has put us right back into really the aughts with regard to capability. And that's why hybrid CMSs really are the future. It turns out that the headless CMSs are racing to be able to provide hybrid capabilities. We already have those capabilities, but everything we do, we look at in the light of it's got to work for both our headless customers as well as our more traditional CMS type customers. Third pillar that we use to shape our development process is the idea of NoCode. Now, NoCode's an ideal, right? It's a broad statement, but if you boil it down, you end up with the idea of making a complex, what it would be a complex interaction, as simple as possible for your business users without forcing them to have to engage with an IDE or understand complex code in order to get things done. We strive to offer no-code solutions to complex problems, and sometimes, the best we can do is a low-code solution to offer the optimum sort of trade-off between power and simplicity. But we want to give users the ability to make the important content interactivity changes within the tool itself without having to undergo a complex development process. That's what all of our development strives for, and that's why we implement these ideas of no code wherever we can throughout the system. Finally, there's user experience, and in everything we do in dotCMS, in every new development, we factor in how is the user going to interact with our new tooling, and how easy is it going to be for the user not only to use the tool but to understand it, to come to it for the first time, to understand what they're supposed to do, and to not really be confused by the tools that we're offering. We try to make, wherever possible, the dotCMS UI and functionality to behave in a straightforward manner. And that means that we try to avoid abstractions. We hope that this straightforwardness gives a certain simplicity or directness to how users can interact with the back end and basically the results of that interaction on the front end or for their content. And it's an important pillar. User experience is an important pillar that we use to shape what's going to come next, and also how what's going to come next should be delivered and consumed by our end users. Well, before we dive into what's coming with dotCMS, I'd like to talk a little bit about 2020 and where we've come from. 2020 in dotCMS, we had a banner year, as I said before. There's a lot of new faces. For those of you who've been around for years, many of our longer customers, we brought in a lot of new staff in almost every department, from sales and marketing to development to cloud engineering and support. We've also seen our recurring revenue grow over 20% the past year, and this is revenue growth that continues the trend of growth year over year that we've seen over the past 5 years, right? And the interesting thing about 2020 is that new cloud customers make up the majority of that revenue growth, and that's a new thing for dotCMS, that our cloud product is really beginning to take the majority of our new sales. And finally, with regard to the software itself, we've been pushing hard. We've been working on pushing out releases every month. In 2020, we closed over 850 GitHub issues, and that encompasses enhancements, feature requests, epics, bug fixes, and this resulted in 18 new releases, right? And the delivery of really an important new component in running dotCMS is the LTS, or long-term supported release. We recommend that any of our customers run the LTS release unless they're in pre-implementation or they're looking to take advantage of a new or bleeding edge capability. We believe that LTS sets our dotCMS customers up for the best dotCMS experience and the most easily supported dotCMS experience, and that's a really important component of what we're doing in our scalability as a software and support team. So continuing on the retrospective here, we delivered a lot in 2020, right? We updated our UI libraries, we upgraded Angular to 10, we've moved our UI to use Prime and G10, we've incorporated a mono-repo tool called NX. We had a bunch of different UI, UX libraries that we all pulled together using the NX mono-repo, and basically it will build and test all of those components as one. It makes keeping the versions of all those different components and the interactivity of all those different components more in sync. We've also enabled ARM support for dotCMS. This is something that came late in 2020, but ARM processors are in ascendance both in laptops with the new Apple products, also at Amazon with the Graviton series of processors. So dotCMS officially runs on ARM, and we release a Docker image that's been built to run on ARM chips. And the benefits really of running on ARM architectures are twofold, right? They perform better than the x86 chips. And secondly, they're much more cost effective from a cloud perspective. Roughly the same workload, running the same workload, apples to apples, running it on ARM is going to be 40% cheaper, right? So that's a huge savings. Really what that comes down to is just better performance for dotCMS at the same price point. We've also moved to use Calver, or calendar versioning, for dotCMS, right? This is a much cleaner way to version our releases, and basically the version number that you're running is the year followed by the month of the release. And what that does is give everyone a very clear picture as to not only what version they're running, but also when that version was released and how old that version is that they're running, right? And this is important because a lot of times we have customers that go long and run the versions longer than really their support window. And a Calver versioning gives everyone really instant visibility into the fact that, look, you're running a version that's now 5 years old. It's going to have bugs. It's going to be insecure. It's time to upgrade. We've also completed the first phase of what we're calling the NoCode page or route builder. Just rolls right off the tongue. Marketing's not my strong suit. Anyway, what this really is a tool that eases headless implementations or API first type implementations. Anyone can come and start a blank dotCMS instance, instantly create a new page, and instantly be able to begin adding all different types of content and layout to that page without having to go in and build templates or containers in Velocity. And in 2020, we completed the initial part of this development, and we'll be finishing up the final part here over the next couple months. And it's important, again, from the headless perspective, that we've also pushed forward with our GraphQL tooling. GraphQL, we now leverage GraphQL for not only for content, but also for page API calls, and even firing rules or personalization on pages. And it's important, again, when a headless developer wants to pull in a page layout, doesn't want to have to learn a new API, they can just make a GraphQL call to be able to get that information as well. Moving on and continuing to, I guess, pat ourselves on the back. We've done a lot of work in a lot of places in the software, right? We've worked on edit mode, and edit mode is now more performant, especially on large pages with a lot of content. Dragging and dropping content works better across the system. It auto scrolls. It has a little animation that you're dragging and dropping, and it makes the whole process of managing content on a page much more satisfying. And we're going to continue to push forward and inject more performance improvements there into edit mode. We've also added a caching layer on top of GraphQL. This really makes GraphQL API calls fly. We're in single millisecond response times, and I'll talk a little bit about it later when we come back to it. Another subtly important thing we've done is we've made the ingestion of push publishing bundles stateful. And what does it mean? This means that in dotCMS you can push multiple bundles simultaneously from a dotCMS installation, but on the receiving end, only one bundle will be ingested at a given time. And this is important because previously in dotCMS, if multiple bundles were published simultaneously, let's say by multiple users, the bundles could conflict, and the dotCMS receiver would be potentially importing bundles that stepped on each other, possibly causing deadlocks and errors that are really hard to debug. And so we just made that process more stable and streamlined so a bundle can be imported one at a time on the receiver, right? And continuing to push for modernizing our stack, we've automated our software release process. This has been a long time coming. So now our software release process is based upon the actual release tag in GitHub. And the release process uses GitHub Actions, and it's basically fires off automated testing and goes through a roughly, 20-step checklist or actions that we had to do manually previously on every given release. All of this happens now on an automated and repeatable process, and that gets us closer to the idea of a continuous delivery for a latest version of dotCMS, and it allows us to explore pushing out, continuous fixes, continuous improvements, and updates to our cloud infrastructure. And finally, we've added an easy-to-use getting started screen for new users. This is a nice UI improvement, but we think it's actually really important for adoption, especially for headless developers, adoption in the community, right? New users can come, log in for the first time, and easily see what they need to do in order to begin defining and managing content in dotCMS, right? And it's an effort to try to make the dotCMS backend, which compared to some of our competitors, some of our, I guess, less capable competitors, I'll say, it makes the dotCMS backend a little bit less overwhelming for first-time users. Another component we focused on over the past year is making dotCMS more secure out of the box. This culminated lately in us releasing dotCMS running on the latest version of Tomcat 9, a much more modern release, and having common production security settings set on the outset with the download of the dotCMS image. This includes things like having SSL on by default, having our cookies using secure settings like HTTP only, same site, and forced security, and automatically adding security headers that modern security scans are looking for when they test for any site for vulnerabilities or XSS, right? Going into that release pipeline that I was talking about previously, we are right now in the process of automating vulnerability scanning into that process, so that when it can even be automated into our development process, so that given some tag or trigger, that's going to automatically fire a automated vulnerability scan using OWASP's vulnerability tool. So we can have much more real-time information regarding, the security and the vulnerabilities if they were introduced in any part of the release process. So that's a quick look at where we've been over the past year up until, really this latest release. I thought it was important to review some of that stuff because I'm not sure that everyone is keeping up with all of the latest developments. But now we get to look forward. We get to look forward to the rest of 2021 and into 2022. And really, we're moving forward as a tool on all fronts. And I'll start with, I don't mean to belabor this, the NoCode page builder, right? Because I want to talk a little bit more about it because it's important. There's some fundamental things that it's going to bring to the table that are important, I think, for everyone, or interesting at least for all dotCMS users, right? So it's bringing the idea of templates as files. Now, we did this with containers where you can deliver containers as VTL files that live within the system. We're doing the same thing with templates. These templates are just going to be VTL files that will live in the file system. They can be web davved up there and basically can define exactly the code and logic of your template. So no longer are you going to be going into the back end of dotCMS, managing an advanced template or anything like that. All of that can happen using, VTL files that can be versioned outside of dotCMS. The other thing that it's going to bring is the idea of the system template and system container. Now, what these are the system template and the system container are special in that they can be used anywhere. So every dotCMS system is going to have the system template and the system container. And the system container specifically, for example, is built to take any content type in dotCMS. So without having to write a line of velocity code, the system container can take any content and will display some common content properties, very much like shown on the the content search screen. And this is important from a no-code perspective, as it allows you to, when your components and your CSS and all of that live outside of dotCMS and in a headless or SPA, then you don't want to have to re-implement your look and feel in Velocity just to be able to make it manageable in dotCMS. You just want to get started. You want to build a page, see what happens when you manage a layout, drop a piece of content here, drop a piece of content there, and let your SPA, as you're developing it, just respond to that. And that's what the system container and system template lets you do. Without writing a line of velocity, you can create a page and start putting content on that page that can be consumed by a third-party SPA or application. Another thing we're going to be taking on in the new year, and this is happening as we speak, is refreshing the image editor and also surfacing the idea of focal point, being able to define programmatically, or not programmatically, but being able to define explicitly the focal point and being able to click on the image and say this is where the focal point is, and then using that stored information as the basis for all of your crops. The new image editor is being rewritten in Angular, so we're getting rid of the somewhat clunky Dojo implementation, so it should just be much more performant, easier to use, and also surface the focal point capabilities that are built into dotCMS. We're also embedding a GraphQL Playground into dotCMS, into the back end of dotCMS, and very much like we have the Elasticsearch query tools and the Lucene query tools, the GraphQL Playground will sit next to those and will allow you to write and debug GraphQL queries using the tooling inside dotCMS. So you won't have to deal with a GraphQL client or authentication. You could just click on the portlet and be able to begin interacting with the GraphQL API. Really should help speed adoption of our really rich GraphQL APIs. Continuing down the path of making dotCMS easier to use, especially for business users, we're bringing back the idea of true inline content editing. And excuse me, this inline content editing would happen within edit mode as you're browsing pages to manage, and actually would provide you with a rich WYSIWYG type editing depending on the type of field that's being edited. If you're editing just a text field, you get a simpler editor. If you're editing a rich text field or a WYSIWYG, you'd get a richer editor to really be able to do inline editing, see the changes that you're making. This inline content editing is something that we had in the 4 series that went away when we redid edit mode, but now we're bringing it back because we think it's important to be able to make quick content edits and changes to a page, visually right on that given page. It will work in a headless and headful implementation. So if you're using a single page app and edit mode anywhere, the inline editing will work there as well. And it takes advantage of a new API that we're introducing, the Patch API, which will allow for a batch update of one or more pieces of content, and will allow you to update a single field on one or more pieces of content. So in this case, in inline editing, you'd be making a change to a rich text field. It would save it. It would push just for that piece of content, that's just that field. But you can also do batch updates. So if you have a query of 1,000 pieces of content that you want to change the category for, the tags for, you can use this to actually make that change, and it will run through those 1,000 pieces of content in a multi-threaded way and update all of the values in the back end of dotCMS. So continuing to talk about multi-threaded and really performance capabilities of dotCMS, we always have our eyes on performance as a tool. And we are deep, probably one release away from moving our installation to rely on Java 11. Java 11 is going to bring a lot of just performance improvements out of the box, including better garbage collection algorithms, including low latency garbage collection algorithms, which should really help for customers who want to run large heap sizes, for example. And that release, the Java 11 release, as I mentioned, is coming probably in the early second quarter. The other performance component that we've added recently is the GraphQL query cache. And this graph here is an example of a server, the response times, average response times of a loaded server. And this is a server taking on extreme load. and you were seeing the response times climbing above even 2 seconds here. And as soon as the GraphQL query cache was added, the response times dropped to sub 10 milliseconds, just sort of a flattened the curve out. And so it really helps GraphQL. You can write really GraphQL. You can get exactly the data you want. That's the upside. The downside is you can write really complex and nested queries that recurse into relationships and fill up an object graph, and that can consume a lot of server resources. The GraphQL query cache kind of puts that to bed, and any GraphQL query that's run will get cached. You can actually break that cache by passing a parameter to the query or a comment inside the query itself. Anything that would change the nature of the query is going to be cached separately. So it's easy to invalidate as well as to use, and really helps performance with GraphQL. Turns it into a really high performance GraphQL engine. The reason why GraphQL can consume resources is because you can also query file assets or binary assets with it. And we found what happens, and we've seen this in a number of different implementations, is that in a clustered environment where assets are being served over NFS, the very act of just querying the assets, finding out the sort of metadata around those assets, like does it exist, how big is it, when was the last modification date, what's the file name, these sort of low-lying file system queries add up. They go over the network, and on an NFS mount, they can really slow the API response. And so what we're adding in dotCMS is an asset metadata cache, right? And this asset metadata cache is the first phase of a much bigger improvement that's actually going to improve our API and velocity performance by caching the responses for these low-level calls and storing that metadata in either, it's going to store it, obviously there'll be a in-memory nature to it, or it can store it in the database or on the file system. But when an asset's queried and called, that's going to come from cache, and the response time on that query is going to be much quicker. And I know that this sort of seems low level and unimportant, but if you've ever written any velocity in the system, and you get an image of a piece of content, and then get the image width or get the image type, MIME type, or any of that stuff, you're going and you're hitting the file asset metadata, and that actually can cause a performance issue without this cache. So this is something that we're fixing in an upcoming version. The addition of this file asset, of this metadata storage and cache, is actually going to allow us to explore new ways to store assets in dotCMS. The idea being that in dotCMS we could develop a shared nothing asset storage mechanism where when assets are uploaded or added to dotCMS, they're basically saved locally first to whatever servers the person's connected to, and then pushed to a central S3 store asynchronously. And when other servers call for that asset, they would retrieve the asset's metadata, find the pointer to the asset based on a hash, which would basically dedupe any asset storage, and then retrieve that asset for delivery without relying on an NFS share. And that being able to break that sort of last shared component of NFS will really simplify our cloud architecture and really simplify the idea of scaling dotCMS to be able to just add new nodes without having to share or mount an NFS share. So that's where we're going with the cloud asset store, and the first step is this new asset metadata storage and cache that I was talking about. Another big component that we're working on, we're beginning to roll out both on our own site and really starting to explore with some customers, is the idea of offering dotCDN, right? And dotCDN is a content delivery network, which which has multiple POPs all across the world that dotCMS can communicate with. We'll have a built-in app that can connect to the dotCDN and basically will allow you to do things like automatically prefix your calls to any assets with the proper, CDN pathing, to be able to automatically have that pathing be invalidated whenever any new asset version of an asset is updated, and also be able to integrate the invalidations into a workflow. So when content's published, you can push that invalidations to force the CDN to refresh its store, or if an image or binary is unpublished, likewise you can invalidate that asset from the store. So it would be a in dotCMS tool, and dotCMS does work with a lot of different CDNs. This would just be a easy to use out of the box CDN that dotCMS is just ready to engage with on an automatic basis. The last thing I'm going to talk about with regard to features in dotCMS is a feature that we've talked about probably for a year, maybe a year and a half now, but we're actually getting started on developing at this point, which is the idea of a block content editor built into dotCMS. A block content editor is a little bit different than a WYSIWYG. It operates a lot like a WYSIWYG in the sense that you do get what you see is what you get type representation, but instead what it allows you to do is to break your contents up into blocks and inject different blocks in between those blocks. So, think about some blogs that you follow, or, news articles, news sites that you read, how they have stories that will be interspaced with video or an image gallery or even different types of content to support that story. That's what a block-styled WYSIWYG is going to bring to us, is the ability to say, okay, I have this, this story, this that's a full story, but after paragraph 1, I want to inject, a supporting video, and after paragraph 4, I'm going to inject a photo gallery, and all that can happen. Right now, you can do that in a page in dotCMS, but it becomes difficult because you have to break a piece of content up into multiple content objects. The block content editor is going to be a single interface where you can create those types of stories, change the order, and be able to move and inject different content and even potentially containers into that block and display those in line. The difference between the block content editor and, let's say, just the standard WYSIWYG is that the content in a block content editor is actually stored as a JSON object. And that JSON object can be exported. It can be exported into Markdown. It can be exported into HTML. That can be used both on the front end of dotCMS, so we'll have obviously view tools in place with Velocity to handle the block content, but from a headless perspective, we'll also have the ability to deliver that block as, let's say, HTML, or deliver that block as Markdown, depending, or just as JSON objects that your front end can deal with on it the way that it sees fit. Block content editors are the foundation for collaborative editing in dotCMS, where multiple collaborators can work on a single piece of content at any given time. But it's really the future, I think, for content editing. WordPress's Gutenberg editor is a block content editor, and it's just an important, really, tool in an arsenal of a CMS, and especially in the headless space. Finally, I want to share some big news and a large undertaking that we're, as an organization, doing for our cloud offering. We're moving to become SOC 2 certified for our cloud offering, and this is a full SOC 2 audit, Type 2 audit, that's beginning in the second quarter of 2021, and we'll audit our processes, our policy, our controls, and our governance and security of the dotCMS cloud. We've brought in a number of new systems in place to make managing our cloud simpler and to make managing our cloud much more secure. And we're rigorously deploying policies and new frameworks in order to ensure that we maintain that security and those controls here moving forward. It's a very exciting piece to dotCMS Cloud. It should, if you're a cloud customer, it should give you some peace of mind that we're moving forward with this. And for new dotCMS customers, it's becoming absolutely imperative, really table stakes to any type of enterprise cloud offering to be able to prove your security worthiness and your credentials. So it's something that we're very excited about. We have a whole team dedicated to pushing this ball up the hill, but it's something that we are in process with as we speak, and we expect to receive the certifications. We're undergoing the audit starting this quarter, or Q2 2021, and expect to receive our certification initially by the end of Q3, maybe Q4 2021. So that's something that we can share with all of our cloud customers and even potential cloud customers who are looking to move to dotCMS Cloud. And as I mentioned, I think it should give everyone sort of a peace of mind and about the seriousness and the maturity of our cloud offering. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this Spring 2021 roadmap presentation, a little bit of a retrospective, but also I hope I shared some exciting new things that are coming down the pipe. Everything I did share, I think in this roadmap, nothing was really aspirational here. Everything is in train. So that's a very exciting piece, doing a roadmap that, we're actually moving forward on all these different fronts, as I mentioned in the beginning. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this webinar, and we will take questions after this presentation. And I hope everyone has a great day and a safe and healthy remainder of 2021. Thank you, everyone.